Singapore is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, and it sits on an island with almost no room left to grow. Yet since independence, the country has added roughly a quarter more land to its total area, not by annexing territory, not by building upward, but by reaching into the sea and pulling the ground up from beneath the water. The problem was that doing this at scale required one thing Singapore simply did not have enough of: sand. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what Singapore actually is. It's a city-state, a country that is also its own capital, with no agricultural hinterland, no mineral wealth, and no buffer of undeveloped land to absorb growth. When the population began expanding rapidly in the decades after independence in 1965, the government faced a hard arithmetic problem. More people needed more housing, more industry, more port capacity, more airport runways. But the island's natural coastline was already fixed. The only direction left was outward, into the surrounding water. Land reclamation, the process of adding material to a body of water to create usable ground, is not a new idea. Civilizations have been doing versions of it for centuries. The basic method is straightforward. You take rocks, soil, sand, or cement, and you deposit them into shallow coastal water until the seabed rises above the surface. In some cases, submerged wetlands can simply be drained. But Singapore's ambitions were not modest, and the shallow waters surrounding the island demanded enormous volumes of fill material. Sand, specifically, became the critical input, cheap to source in theory, easy to transport by barge, and well-suited to the hydraulic filling methods that could move it quickly across large areas. The early phases of reclamation drew on sand dredged from Singapore's own seabed and from nearby sources. That worked for a while. But as the program expanded, pushing out the southern coastline, building up the eastern shore, merging smaller offshore islands into larger land masses, the local supply ran short. Singapore had consumed what was conveniently available. The project was not finished. The demand was not going away, and the country had no mountains to quarry, no great rivers depositing sediment, no desert interior to mine. This is the constraint that made Singapore's reclamation program genuinely unusual. It wasn't just an engineering challenge. It was a resource dependency problem embedded inside a geopolitical one. To keep building land, Singapore had to import the raw material for that land from other countries. It became, for a period, one of the largest sand importers in the world. Neighboring countries, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cambodia, all became sources at various points. But sand extraction at the scale Singapore required is not a neutral act. Dredging riverbeds and coastal areas removes habitat, accelerates erosion, and can alter the hydrology of entire river systems. One by one, neighboring countries restricted or banned sand exports to Singapore, Indonesia in 2007, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia at various points, citing environmental damage and, in some cases, concerns about Singapore's expanding coastline encroaching on disputed maritime boundaries. The Malaysia-Singapore border itself runs along the Straits of Johor, defined by straight lines near the deepest channel of that waterway. When Singapore reclaims land along its northern or southern shores, it is working in close proximity to boundaries that are already sensitive. The geometry of reclamation, pushing a coastline outward, can shift the practical relationship between two countries even when the legal boundary line stays fixed on a map. Faced with shrinking access to imported sand, Singapore's engineers and planners had to adapt. The response was not to abandon reclamation, but to change how it was done. Rather than relying on a single fill material sourced from one region, projects began incorporating a wider mix. Different grades of sand from more distant sources, rock and aggregate where sand was unavailable, and more sophisticated engineering of the reclaimed ground itself. The Housing and Development Board, the agency responsible for carrying out reclamation works, oversaw projects that required not just moving material, but engineering the resulting land to be stable enough for heavy construction. Reclaimed ground is not automatically solid. It settles. It can liquefy under stress. Making it buildable requires compaction, drainage systems, and in some cases, years of monitored settlement before structures can go up. The merging of islands is one of the clearest illustrations of how this process reshaped Singapore's physical geography. What were once separate islands and islets, visible on older maps as distinct dots of land surrounded by water, were connected to each other and to the main island through accumulated reclamation work over decades. The southern islands in particular were transformed. Jurong Island, now a major petrochemical hub, was assembled from 7 smaller islands joined together by reclaimed land. That single project created an industrial zone that would have been impossible to build on any of the original islands individually. The cost of all this is not only financial, though the financial cost is substantial. The ecological cost is harder to quantify, but real. Coastal reclamation destroys the habitats it buries: seagrass beds, coral reefs, intertidal zones. Singapore has lost the majority of its original mangrove coverage. The marine environment around the island is fundamentally different from what it was before large-scale reclamation began. Whether that trade-off was worth making is a question that depends on what you value and where you stand. For a government managing a small, resource-poor city-state with a rapidly growing population, the calculus pointed clearly toward building the land. For the ecosystems that were replaced, there is no equivalent calculus. There is also genuine uncertainty about the long-term stability of reclaimed land in a region where sea levels are projected to rise. Singapore sits close to sea level across much of its reclaimed coastline. The government has acknowledged this as a planning challenge, and newer reclamation projects are built to higher elevations than older ones. But the interaction between reclaimed ground, rising seas, and the engineering of future infrastructure remains an open question, one that Singapore's planners are actively working on, rather than one that has been resolved. Today, Singapore's total land area is meaningfully larger than it was at independence, and reclamation continues. The country has not solved the sand problem so much as it has managed it, diversifying sources, changing methods, and accepting that the era of cheap, nearby fill material is over. What remains is a program that has to be more deliberate, more expensive, and more technically sophisticated than the early phases were. The easy reclamation happened first. What comes next requires engineering the ground itself, not just piling material into shallow water. The lesson Singapore's reclamation program actually teaches is not that engineering can overcome any constraint. It's that solving one constraint, not enough land, can create a cascade of others: resource dependency, diplomatic friction, ecological loss, and long-term vulnerability to the very sea you built into. The ground Singapore stands on today is real and functional and home to millions of people. It is also, in a precise and literal sense, borrowed, assembled from material that came from somewhere else, shaped by decisions about what to sacrifice and what to build, and sitting at the edge of water that is slowly, measurably rising. Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.